Hey, Lane, the Grove Bowl was standing. You guys are now kind of at the halfway point of spring practice. Just a general assessment of, questions that you wanted answered going into the spring, how everything is on track.
Well, I've been pleased with our defense, limiting explosive plays, attitude, confidence, um, which is a big key for us. Offensively, we have a lot of players out, um, really all around, especially skills. So that's not helped the quarterback play, obviously, but um, very pleased with a lot of guys on defense, returners, and new guys. I feel like, for whatever it's worth in practice, we feel like a different defense than a year ago.
Any of those new guys in particular that you can talk about that have kind of been maybe out of the package ready a little bit?
Well, I think of the freshmen, a number of them are doing great things. I think Taishim has really, like coaches say, kind of doesn't seem like a freshman, which has been great. He's played a number of positions, so a lot of those guys are doing a great job.
Thanks.
Parrish? Lane, I didn't get to see practice Saturday, but it sounds like the JUCO defensive tackles both played. I was wondering if you could just talk about their progress and what you've seen in them so far.
They did well. Isaiah played inside and outside, did really well. Jamon did also, but that's been great to see. These evaluations have been tough. Haven't ever met guys, let alone see them play a lot of times. And see them in person. So it's kind of been a wild card, not knowing what's coming in, especially for junior college players, which you'd like to be recruiting those guys to play right away and not be long-term projects.
Last year on the offensive line, you guys didn't sub a whole lot during games. I know a lot of that has to do with the style of offense, but what do you think about the depth that's developing there right now?
Well, we've had a lot of injuries there. So what we do, we haven't, for the last couple of days, we have not two spotted, which hurts our development at other positions, but we just, haven't been able to have two fields. We've only had 10 linemen, I think, today, total scholarship and walk-on. So kind of hard to feel good about depth when we just don't have many numbers out there.
Jake Wright, go ahead.
Hey, Coach Kiffin, I'm up in Sevierville where Landon Israel is from. And so I was going to ask you about him. Like, what was your reaction whenever you got the letter from him? Have you ever gotten one of those before? And like, what went through your mind whenever he realized, this is a little kid, 9-year-old, wanting to change fans from Tennessee?
Well, we get a lot of letters over the years and, try to respond to them in some manner. I just thought his was a little bit different. And so just kind of, just said, all right, this was pretty neat for him to take that much time. Let's see if we can do something that the kid will remember the rest of his life. So, instead of just sending something, just decided to call him, talk to his dad, and then set up a call with him, so we could personally talk to him and, find him a home for a fan. So really, really mature kid. Think that he'll develop into, a premier fan, 5-star fan, and, one that they think, wouldn't need the red shirt. I think he'll be ready to go when he gets here.
So what was your recruiting pitch to Ole Miss, over the Alabamas and Tennessees? And like, is it cool that they were a couple of the final schools that he was considering giving your ties to the Alabamas and Tennessees?
Yeah. I mean, just like recruiting, you got to know your opponent and know how invested they are. And I think, some people wrote letters, some people sent some sunglasses and stuff, but, there's nothing like personal touch. So I think, calling him myself and talking to him, I think was a big factor in this. And so, maybe those guys will learn next time.
Neil, go ahead.
I kind of feel bad following that. I'm curious. You talked about confidence in your program. How has that changed from when you first got here, and maybe from when you guys first started fall camp last August as compared to now?
In some ways, it feels like a first year because of not having spring, but having some success on the field, as a team and individual players, has made this a lot easier, obviously, because they feel like, okay, hey, we know this works if we do it right. So, and to be in so many games, close games against really good teams, I think helps that a lot. So there's a much different feel, yes.
And I'm curious, going into a scrimmage like the one you'll have coming up, the one you had this past Saturday, when you don't have a lot of the guys that you're hoping to have offensively in the fall, is there a different approach that you take? Is there certain things that you're trying to get out of it that maybe the fan in the stands can't really see?
No, I mean, we're just still trying to look at whoever's out there, and just doing this a while, you don't get too freaked out about one scrimmage. Or last year, if you were at scrimmages in fall, you would have never thought we were going to play as poorly on defense and as well on offense. We weren't even moving the ball, in some of the scrimmages against down the line guys. So I think that happens a little bit sometimes with tempo. You just, until you really get in the game as much as you simulate it, you just don't move the ball quite as well in practice and scrimmage formats. So, we're just trying to get the best out of whoever's out there.
Nate, go ahead.
Lane, curiosity with the news of last week. Do you pay attention to stuff like the NIL case going on at the Supreme Court level? And are you guys bracing or preparing at all as an athletic department for what changes might happen to college football if and when that passes?
Yeah, we've been in discussions about that, or potential things that we do here for the players, for, I would say, a year now. So we'll be ready whenever that happens.
What kind are some of the discussions you have about?
Well, just bringing in different people, and so that you have a program in place where just not as coaches you're doing it, that, you're able to set these things up and able to manage these, and so that the players are getting the most that they can out of the rules, but at the same time, it's not major distractions for them.
Parrish, go ahead.
Lane, from a skill set perspective, what goes into being a 5-star fan that 4-star fans and 3 stars don't bring to the table?
Well, I like fans that, don't change every day, and don't, they look at the big picture. And like I always say, we watch games and, the field goal misses by 6 inches, and now that coach and that team's horrible, but the other team's great. And so, but if it goes in, then it's the other way around. So I think, people that look at the overall picture and understand where you're at, from a program standpoint and where you're headed.
David Johnson.
Yeah, Lane, just curious what you've seen out of true freshman Brandon Buckhalter, and how he's fitting in the wide receivers room and into the rotation this spring.
Yeah, he's doing good. These kids, it's hard. I remind our coaches, all the time, they're seniors in high school still. And so, now they're here playing and going to school and all this stuff. That's why it's important to be a mid-year, because it is very distracting, very hard adjustment. So instead of having to do that in the fall, you're getting it done in the spring. So, they go through a lot of growing pains, but he's got a really bright future.
Thank you.
Yep.
Blake Topmeyer.
Hey, Lane, I wanted to ask you about the one-time transfer exception conversation. The NCAA might pass that rule change this spring to one-time transfer exception rule. If the NCAA does pass that, do you think the SEC should also allow for one-time transfers within the conference, or would you rather see the SEC keep its rule making transfers within the conference sit out of here?
I think they should be able to. I mean, it's about players' rights and the ability to transfer. Why now you're going to limit where they can go. So, and this is all about, like everybody says, ADs, coaches, everybody else can move. Why can't the players? So now you're going to limit where they can go. And so kid wants to go to a program closer to home or whatever reasons, and he can't. And why would you want to do that from a conference standpoint? If you got good players, you know, you're in the best conference in America by far. It's not even close. So why would you want players to transfer and not be able to stay within conference, make your conference better, but be able to go make other conferences better? I would not understand that.
Thanks.